Hello, everyone. My name is Yuwei Chen. I'm a managing consultant at Cross Country Consulting. I have my colleague Anzio with me here today to discuss how to compare CECL results to ALLL. This is probably the first question people would ask when looking at the initial CECL results. Some might observe higher reserves, and some might see lower reserves. People would also find it is very challenging to get a straightforward answer because of the fundamental differences between the two accounting standards. Our point of view is, although it will never be an apple-to-apple comparison, we can still leverage some of the connections between the two and perform analysis that will give us meaningful insights to the changes in estimated reserves. We have listed out the key considerations we found very useful when comparing CECL to ALLL. First of all, we need to understand what the key differences between the two accounting standards are. CECL requires reserves to cover expected lifetime credit losses, so that theoretically, financial assets with long expected life would have higher estimated reserves under CECL. In order to remove the impact of moving to lifetime loss estimation, we can use annualized loss rates in the comparison. Additionally, it is very likely that a new loss estimation methodology is used for CECL. Converting to loss rates would make the different loss estimation methods comparable. CECL also requires measurement of expected credit loss based on reasonable and supportable forecasts. It is very common to have multiple macro scenarios in CECL loss estimation, so that by design, CECL would be less procyclical than ALLL. However, we did observe higher volatility in CECL results since it is more of a point-in-time measure. Because of that, we should not only look at the weighted average results, but also look at the results in each individual scenario and the market condition to understand how CECL reserve reacts to different scenarios when comparing to ALLL. Secondly, the differences in model inputs could also impact the loan loss reserve estimations. CECL generally requires much more data and granular, sometimes loan-level information. In case internal data is not sufficient, external industry data could also be leveraged. Different data sources, data quality issues, and transformation logics would all result in different in the reserves. Thirdly, because the methodology are very likely to be different, key drivers and assumptions used in both CECL models and ALLL models need to be fully understood and documented, especially when CECL numbers turn out to be lower than ALLL. Proper documentation and supporting analysis would be critical for all relevant stakeholders to feel comfortable about the decreases in reserves. Lastly, when communicating the changes in reserves externally, it is easier if the differences are categorized to impact of change in accounting standards versus impact of change in methodologies. After going over the key considerations and perform proper analysis, we would expect the majority of the change in reserve would be due to the accounting standard change. Hopefully, those key considerations would help to rationalize the differences in estimated reserves when comparing CECL to ALLL. It is also very helpful to have a standardized and dynamic reporting process, which my colleague Anzio will walk you through next.
Thanks, Yuan. In terms of standardized reporting, I want to talk briefly about two separate sections, right? The first is going to be the change between our incurred loss and CECL, which is basically everything we're doing up until our go live date. And the second is going to be our CECL over CECL dynamic reporting package, which I'll discuss in a few seconds. So without further ado, let's jump straight into this slide. From our experience, we've seen that there are a whole host of different factors that drive the difference between the incurred loss model and our CECL model. Now, what those drivers would be will obviously differ significantly depending what kind of business you're in. But ultimately what we've done here is provided some kind of examples that you can use to get your senior management over the line when trying to communicate what our changes from our incurred loss to our CECL number. And the changes listed below over here provide some additional insight as to what are CECL specific changes. These include things like moving from a default horizon to a lifetime loss with amortization considered, changes in the potential bases of our probabilities of default, moving from through the cycles to points in time potentially, the effects of your macroeconomic conditions that factor in that forward-looking view that we need to consider, and then of course there might be other unexplainable things that would be, collateral effects from the rest of all of these here. Okay, so we are now live in CECL. Incurred loss is a thing of the past, and what we need is a useful tool that's going to help us actively monitor, assess, and control what our CECL allowance is going to be. And tools such as Power BI and Tableau are excellent use cases for this kind of situation because they're so much more superior than static Excel tables because of the dynamic nature of all the information. And I'll give you an example of that now. So here you can see we basically got a summary of an example portfolio. Right up at the top, you can already see how we sliced and diced it. We can see we've got our 3 portfolios, how we go about collectively evaluating them, and then we've got a summary of what the actual balance is, what the calculated allowance is, and what our actual allowance rate is. That's all good and well, right? We can produce that on Excel. But what you can't do on Excel is actually analyze your data in a more dynamic way. Where here we've already produced information that's going to give us the industry. We're already assessing the credit worthiness of the entire portfolio by having a look at that. We've got our top 10 customers here, as well as visualizations of just how big our allowances are. What's nice though is if I want to know about the direct collectively evaluated portfolio, for example, just by clicking it automatically changes some of the information so I can get a sense of which customers sit in that population and what my allowance actually is. If, however, you wanted to get even more granular with that, we do have that functionality. So over here, you can see we've got slightly different information at a more granular level, where here we can basically slice all the information by our major reporting lines. Let's say I want to look at North America, for example. What it does is automatically formats, once again, all the information to give me the exact information I need. Now, given there's just 1 month of data in here, you would then go and see the allowance rate month over month. Down below here, we can now see that stack chart is now basically just showing the terms of North America. We're then getting the allowance rate and the amortized cost of that going forward. If I wanted to see Latin America, I would do exactly the same thing, and I can slowly begin to drill down and better understand what the drivers of my allowance is. And that's obviously far more important under CECL because of the larger number of factors that are there. So if you're trying to understand those drivers, these kind of dashboards would be really, really useful ways to help describe and explain what's driving those changes. Okay, that I think is all the information we are going to showcase today. Please feel free to reach out to any of the cross-country personnel if you'd like some more information about how we go about setting these tools up. Any more information on CECL and what the transition is going to be, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic day.